Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and we are continuing on our expression tool expedition. We are still in the expression designer, but now we are going to start looking at the playback portion of the expression designer, which it can be found in this central tab here, the playback. Now, before I even get going, I do want to mention that the playback options, the playback functionality for expressions in Finale, if you choose type, you can see all the different types of playback options available, and I will cover as much of this as I can. Um, the thing about this is that it's a mess. The playback functionality for expressions in Finale is a bit of a dustbin of legacy playback options in Finale, particularly with the advent of Human Playback, which was many versions ago, maybe 10, 11, 12 years ago, I think Human Playback was added. It made a lot of these playback functions sort of unnecessary or redundant. And so a lot of this stuff exists purely for the sake of if you have a legacy file that has expressions that have this type of playback things, you don't want to lose that because otherwise you'd lose a lot of playback functionality in your older files. So all of this stuff got kept in the program, despite the fact that a lot of it is unnecessary anymore. But there is stuff that is necessary, so I will go through some of this in that lens as well. So there may be occasions where I'll just sort of very quickly gloss over something, and the reason is that it's probably not that necessary anymore. So anyway, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different types of playback functionality, including tempos, key velocities, all kinds of MIDI controller things that you can do. So we'll go through all of this, and I think this is going to take a while, so I'm going to divide this into 3 videos, and this first one will deal with the ones that are related to tempo or style. We'll start there. And once you choose one of these playback types, the bottom section will be what you can do with that. And they call it the effect. So you can either set the value of the tempo for, in this case, to whatever it is you want to set it to, or there's the option to execute a shape. And if we select this, we have a whole executable shape selection box here, and we can pull up an executable shape designer, which I will sort of touch on a little bit as we're going with some of these elements, but that's a whole other level of finaleing right there. Most of the time, we will be using the set to value. And the value that you can set here does actually change depending on the type of playback effect you choose. So tempo, for example, could be anything from 1 to whatever, but certain things like controller data, you're probably going to be limited in most cases to a number of 127 right there. I know that the pitch wheel set to value numbers span somewhere between negative and positive 8,000 something. So there's that many increments of pitch wheel that you can use. And then other things like swing, for example, you can actually pull up a pull-up menu to kind of choose a type of swing you want. So the set to value and the executable shape options will change depending on which type you have. And in some cases, you can use either set to value or execute shape. In other cases, you can only use one or the other. And we'll go through that as we go on. And then just really quickly, the play on pass section here. If the expression itself is within a section that has repeats, you can check this and then choose which repeat you want that expression's playback to affect. So if you want it to only apply to the second time, just check that and put the number 2 in there. And that expression playback function will only happen the second time through. So that's what that does in case you need that. So let's start looking at some of these specific types. And again, I mentioned we'll start with tempo and style. So we're here. So we've got tempo. And once again, with the tempo selected, you do have the option over here to choose what value you want to equal the number here. So in this case, quarter note equals 120. Now, one thing I want to mention about this, I'm going to because what I'm doing right now is I'm editing this this technique text that's simply called playback. I'm going to go to the tempo marks category, and in this particular category, there is a very specific option that's available in your expressions that aren't available in other expression categories. So if I edit this presto marking here, for example, and go to playback, you'll see that a new option appears at the top called Match Playback to Metronome Marking Text. And this is really handy because what this will literally do is that if you check that, whatever you have typed in your main text field here, in this case quarter note equals about 180, that value will get put in here. It will say tempo quarter note equals 180. So you can change any of these values. In fact, you can put dotted quarter equals 160 here. And as soon as you do that, you go into the playback function. And it's a little bit grayed out, but you can see that dotted quarter is selected here. Actually, if I uncheck it, it'll be ungrayed out. Dotted quarter equals 160, right? So matching that playback will, this will allow you to sort of not have to worry about changing the tempo in two different places, as it were. So just choose whatever it is you need. Quarter note equals 180, and with the match tempo, it goes back to quarter note equals 180, which is kind of cool. And again, this only applies to the elements within the tempo marks category. If I go back to that technique text, that playback expression that I created, you'll see that that match tempo doesn't exist here. You can still, however, choose tempo and set it as you want. So that is available as well. But for now, let's ignore that. So we've got this. Now I just set this. There's no playback effect to the expression that says playback right now. But you can see that what we have here is the presto marking at 180, the adagio at 56, and well, actually, I'll just delete this so you're absolutely sure. There is no tempo marking on the first bar. So what happens with tempo in Finale is that whatever tempo you have set in the playbacks control, in this case 120, that is what the initial tempo would be if there's no tempo marking. All right, so if we now were to play this back, you'd hear it start at 120. And then with every new tempo expression, we'd get a new tempo. Now, in this fourth bar here, you notice I put this technique text tempo at 120. This is just to indicate that, yes, you can actually change the tempo with a technique text or any other type of category text if you set that playback tempo to that value. So, again, you don't have to use a tempo text to actually change the tempo. It will work anywhere, and in fact, you can see that it's on the bassoon line, and it still works. One of the unique things about tempo playback is that it doesn't matter where the expression is attached to. In this case, the tempo expression is attached to the top staff in the score, but it will be attached to every staff in the parts. But it's going to play back that tempo no matter what, because tempo is sort of a universal effect on the score, right? Pretty much every other type of playback that's available in this list that I'm pulling up right now, pretty much every other playback effect will affect only the staff that it's attached to. So that's going to come into play in a little bit as we get moving here, except for tempo, which will apply to the entire score. So one thing to remember, again, just with the hierarchy of the tempos and how they control the file. The playback controls tempo here, where we have quarter note equals 120. Again, this will apply if there's no other tempo text or no other tempo instruction, basically, in the expressions in the rest of the score. As soon as you put a tempo expression into the score, the tempo will then override this playback controls no matter what you put in here. So again, I could put 80 in here, and you'll only hear that 80 tempo at the very beginning of the score until it gets overridden by the presto here. That's 80. That's 180. Right? And this will apply, I believe, even if human playback is off. Yep. So it doesn't matter if human playback is on or off as far as tempo is concerned. It will take the tempo here first, and then the expression will override that. Now, Finale used to have a tempo tool, which allowed you to sort of put, I guess, hidden tempos kind of embedded in the score in different places. They have since taken that out, probably because the expression functionality for tempos sort of does that anyway. In older version of Finale, I believe the hierarchy is that it will take the tempo from the playback controls first, then the expression, and then the tempo tool, the embedded tempos within the tempo tool will be the final word on whatever the tempo is. In in the version 26.2 or whatever, that tempo tool has been eliminated. So you really only have those two things to worry about in the hierarchy of tempos. Now, it is possible to use an executable shape with tempos, and what I have here is a shape tempo set up here. Let me just see what this is for you. We'll go and look at this. Playback, and you'll see that I have the executable shape selected, and I have this one selected, which is set to these values. I'm not going to get too much into this currently, but essentially what this will do is this should be a retard. Let's see if that's correct. That fifth bar should retard on me, I think. Except it didn't, and I remember why, because the only way that the tempo will execute with an executable shape is if human playback is turned off. So that is the one place where human playback does affect the playback of tempo. Let me see if I can scroll over just so we can just hear the last two bars there. Now that I've turned off human playback. Except it made an XL because that executable shape I had was selected wrong, but you get the idea. The executable shape will only apply on tempos when the human playback is turned off. Human playback will interpret retards and accelerandos, though. So there's no reason to ever really use a shape expression for a tempo, because RIT, even though there's no playback effect on this, let me just show you the expression designer here for the RIT. There's none. There's no playback effect right here. However, human playback will interpret that text, essentially, so it doesn't even need to have instructions from playback. And now we get the retard and the XL. And back to 120, all right? So again, with human playback, it sort of makes the executable shape version of tempo sort of useless. So there really is no reason to use a execute shape for a tempo. All right. So moving on down that list, let me just put this back here so we can have a look at the list again. I'm going to skip some of these. Again, I'm just dealing with tempo and style. So the next one I want to look at is play, ignore, tempo tool changes. There it is, about 2/3 of the way down. Again, this option is pretty much completely irrelevant because the tempo tool has been eliminated from Finale. I'm not going to spend pretty much any time on this. Unless you have an old file that has embedded tempo tool changes, there's absolutely no reason to turn the tempo tool changes on or off. But if you needed to, choose play tempo tool changes. If you want to turn it off, just set the value to 0. If you want it turned on, just set the value to 127. I believe it works like if it's anything higher than 65, it's on. If it's anything 64 or lower, it's off or something like that. But 0 and 127 will be off or on for that. Again, absolutely no reason to use this because the tempo tool has been eliminated. So let's move on to something else, shall we? How about swing? Now again, with swing, you choose swing, and you can set a value manually here, but there are some sort of presets: light, standard, heavy, and dotted 1/8, 16th. And these will just sort of fill in values between 0 and 120, 150. There you go. So you have some options to play with here, or you can enter a number that's sort of in between one of these if you feel like you want to manipulate it a little bit further. Now, here's the thing about swing. Let me just go over to this section I have that's swung. The swing playback expression is not score wide. It is staff specific. It's confusing that it should be like that. I wish that it wasn't, but that's just the way it is. So what you see in my score here is I've got a swing expression set here, and this is out of the tempo marks category, right? So it's going to show on the top of my score, but it's also going to show on the top of every part as well. And what's going to happen here, unfortunately, I've got looks like 5 instruments playing the same line. And you'd think that all 5 of these are going to swing, but they're not. And let's see if we can hear what it sounds like. It sounds straight. You can't even hear that the flute is swinging, but it should be swinging because I believe I have that set to swing at standard, right? So it's confusing that it doesn't work that way. So to get swing to play back, you could put a swing indication there just for visual effect, but create a technique text that's hidden, like this one that says swing, where the text is actually hidden, and then set that playback effect to swing like that. Assign it to that top staff wherever, and then apply it to the rest of the score. You can do that easily by just pressing Command Return. It will apply it to every single staff up and down the score. And again, it won't print because it's hidden, and then everything will swing. And of course, you do have to cancel the swing as well. So if I only wanted that first bar to swing and go back to straight here, I would have to make another one that I've already made that says no swing, and the swing is set to 0. And again, we can just apply to all. And now we can have different swing. And then straight. There is sort of another way to do this, and I'm going to show you this, but it's sort of, I wouldn't recommend this. It is possible with the tempo expression here. If we edit the category and change the score list here. Now, if you know anything about score lists, which I'm actually going to get to in a later video, but I'll get ahead of myself for a minute. That's all right. We're going to edit the score list. You notice that with this tempo marking, we have it set to show on the top of the score and the top of every part, right? And the result of this for playback purposes is that it's only going to swing the very top staff in the score, and obviously only the top staff in every part. We can sort of get around this by unchecking that and checking all staffs. And now, even though it's only showing on the top of the score, because it's applied to every single staff in this regard, for some reason, Finale will sort of accept that in the score, and it should swing this entire thing. Right. Which is kind of neat. And actually, because I changed the entire category, it actually changed the no swing as well, right? The problem with this, and the reason why I don't recommend this is, obviously if we go through the parts, it's fine. The flute's going to show the swing, no swing, same with, there we go. Same with oboe, same with bassoon, horn, everything. The problem is that in the piano part, let me just zoom in here a little bit. We'll end up with tempo markings. I know this is a mess right now, but we'll end up with tempo markings on both the upper and lower staff. And again, the reason for that is because now the score list has everything checked, including both of the staffs for the piano part, which you sort of would have to do in order to get the left hand and the right hand to swing as well. So again, not an ideal option for this, but I suppose it could work if you don't have any grand staff instruments. Otherwise, I think the way to do this is with that trick of the hidden expression and then apply it to every single staff like I showed you. So let's talk about human playback. Now, with human playback, you probably know that human playback is going to play back, things like arco and pits for a violin. It's going to play back the trill correctly. So let me just get rid of these temporarily here so we can see this. And so you get results like this. It will also play back dynamics. There's the trill, switching to pits. All right. So with the option to turn human playback on and off, let me go back here, technique text. I have these two here called Human Playback On, Human Playback Off. Let me just show you the off here. Set to playback. We have the option down here at the bottom, Human Playback Off, and it's set to 0. All right. Now, when you use an expression like this, it will temporarily turn off the human playback, and then you would have to then set another one, human playback on, to turn it back on. And when you do this, and if you have the human playback set in the playback controls, when you do this, you'll get the human playback turned off for these 3 bars. So there's none of that interpretation that human playback does. And then it returns. There could possibly be uses for this. In case human playback is sort of messing something up for you, if you have a unique type of thing that's not sounding the way you need it to, you can set something up like this where you're turning human playback off temporarily for a couple bars or something with a hidden text just like this. And again, this will turn human playback off just for that staff, by the way. So I have it attached to the violin staff. It's only going to apply to the violin staff, which is interesting. Interestingly, if you have, I'm going to just reverse this. So here I'm going to put human playback on, and then here I'm going to put human playback off. And in the playback controls, I'm going to turn human playback off. If you have it set this way, the human playback on will not override the human playback off from the playback controls. So even though that says human playback on right here, it's not adhering to that at all. So this will only work the other way. So if human playback is set in the playback controls, you can temporarily turn it off to turn it back on, but you can't turn it on to temporarily from off in the playback controls, if that makes sense. The other thing I want to mention, I do want to clear this up because I have seen a lot of confusion about this. In the playback controls, we do have a bunch of different types of human playback. And when you choose some of them, like jazz, for example, you'll notice that it changes the swing automatically. So now it's saying swing 100. If I go back to standard, the swing goes back to 0 and actually gets grayed out. Here's the thing about the human playback and swing. They're not related. The swing isn't part of the jazz human playback style. It's a separate function that just gets changed, I guess, by the grace of Finale being nice to you, because it figures you're changing it to jazz. You must want it to swing, so it's just changing this. But they're not linked. Again, you could have jazz, for example, and then turn the swing off. Right. So again, the swing is a completely different thing. So if you're dealing with, jazz playback, and you think that you can turn off the jazz playback to get rid of the swing, it's not going to work like that. You actually have to turn off the swing specifically with that function that I showed you earlier in the expression playback, if that makes sense. So it is a little funny to think about, but the swing and the human playback style are not related. And then finally, let me just talk very briefly about the last thing I want to show you, which is, where are we? Last thing in that list I want to talk about real quick is the SmartMusic Marker. Now, the SmartMusic Marker type will pull up a bunch of different types, and this has to do with the SmartMusic program that Finale has. And there's some cross-pollination, I think, between Finale and SmartMusic. I don't really know SmartMusic that well. I never use it. I don't even have it. But if you're somebody that does use SmartMusic, this is sort of where you would manually make these expressions to have these particular functions for the SmartMusic happen. The thing that I do understand about this is that it is much easier to deal with SmartMusic from the utilities menu. There's a whole section here, SmartMusic Markers, that pulls up another window in which you can sort of more directly create things that you might need for the SmartMusic, including repeats and wait for note on and all this kind of stuff. And then you can just add it here. And when you do this, what you'll end up doing is creating a invisible expression that has the appropriate playback effect. So although it is possible in the expression designer to manually set these SmartMusic markers in that way, it's not really the best way to go about it. I think it's much easier to go through that utilities menu here, SmartMusic Markers, and deal with it that way. Again, I'm not going to spend any time on that because I don't really know much about SmartMusic, so I would be treading water with that. So, but that's basically how that would work if you're more familiar with SmartMusic. All right, so I think I'm going to leave it there for now, and we'll come back and we'll look at some of the other playback functions that are available in the Expression Designer. All right, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.